Welcome to Bridgetown Forum, Refocusing the Family. We're here with our friend Amber Cantorna, who has an amazing story to tell growing up as a young person in the belly of the beast, focused on the family. I say that in jest. My name's Adam Phillips. I pastor Christ Church here in Portland. We started the church that's a long story. We started it 4 years ago, got thrown out of our denomination for LGBT inclusion. So we kind of had a rebirth. We're resurrection people, right? So we were about 3 years old. We started Bridgetown Forum with some friends a couple years ago when we realized that there were people that were into Jesus and into what Jesus was into, which is the common good. So we are a series of speaking events quarterly, conversations for the common good. We talk about climate change, we talk about houselessness, we talk about LGBTQ equality, we talk about race and ending white supremacy. We talk about the things that we think Jesus would be at the center of in 2018. So Bridgetown Forum is a place where we can be inspired to take action for the common good. And we're so pleased to be co-sponsored tonight by Union for Affirming Christians, which is a great new organization out of Union Seminary in New York, and Convergence, which is a progressive Christian organization looking to bring people from all kinds of different tribes to seek the common good. Again, this is Bridgetown Forum. We're going to hear from Amber. We're going to have some opportunity to talk and have questions with Amber. And then we're going to hear about how we can be involved in a greater fight for equality and inclusion in 2018 into the years ahead. Without further ado, we're so pleased to have Amber join us. Thank you, Amber.
Well, good evening. Am I on? Can you hear me in the back? All right. It doesn't sound quite as loud up here. It is great to be with you this evening. I'm so honored to get to come and share my story here in Portland. We have been touring all across the nation in recent months to share the story and to tell of my background and my upbringing. We've been from coast to coast, and this is one of our final events this evening on the Refocusing My Family tour. So it's one we've looked forward to for a long time, and we're really excited to get to share our story with you tonight and the journey that we have been on. If you would have asked me 10 years ago what I would be doing today, this would not have been it. I would have said that I expected to be married. I would say that I had expected to probably be in some kind of ministry, but it would not have looked like this. It would not have been married to a woman, and I would not be in ministry advocating for LGBT inclusion in the church. I grew up the daughter of an executive at Focus on the Family. And for those of you, is there anybody that does not know what Focus on the Family is? I'm guessing most of you are, that's why you're here. If you do not know, Focus on the Family began in California, and then they transplanted to Colorado Springs in 91. It was an organization founded by James Dobson and continues to be primarily known for fostering family values, fostering parenting values, fostering marriages. And unfortunately, they continue to be known as one of the most anti-LGBTQ organizations still in existence today. My dad started working for Focus on the Family when I was 3 years old, when they were still based in LA area, and he still works there to this day. So that was really the entire world that I grew up under. I knew nothing else. Colorado Springs was very much known as a Christian type city, and still very much is. Many Christian organizations have transplanted there and had their headquarters based in Colorado Springs. It's very well known for having homeschooling, and that's very widely accepted there. And it's just a totally different culture. It's got a lot of military people, so people are very transient. But the culture there is very much primarily Christian. And so as I grew up there, a young girl, I grew up homeschooled K through 12. I knew nothing outside of that. That was my world. And I was always involved in different things. I was always involved in different co-ops or different groups. But people would ask me, do you feel sheltered? And I said, no, because I knew nothing else. That was all that I knew, was kind of being in this cocooned Christian bubble. And what I didn't realize until later in life was that I was really never exposed to diversity of any kind, whether that was racial or religious or ethnic or disability or certainly LGBTQ. everybody looked and believed exactly like I did. And so the role models that I looked up to were people that my parents wanted me to become. And I just grew up kind of cocooned in this place where I was spoon-fed theology and never taught to question anything because you just trusted those in leadership above you. And that was kind of my existence for the first many years of my life. And I never really questioned it because you weren't taught to question. And I never really thought anything outside of that. But as I got older, I started to kind of feel that pressure. When I was young, it was cool to kind of be the kid whose dad worked at Focus, and I got to act in Adventures in Odyssey when I was young, and so you kind of got to be the cool hip kid, and people thought, oh, you just must have the perfect family. And of course, it wasn't perfect. My parents did a lot of things very well. My mom was a great homemaker and was very good at homeschooling us and doing it really well, and very strict and on schedule of, you get up and you have your devotions at 7 o'clock in the morning, and then you have scripture memory at breakfast time, and on it goes from there. And she had everything very structured, and she did it very well. My dad was very present in our lives. I don't remember a time that he ever missed a concert or a recital unless he was traveling. So they were very present in our lives and did a lot of things very well. But there was this responsibility that I started to feel as I grew older to kind of protect my family, to protect this family name, and to kind of hold this responsibility for the reputation that they had in the community. But when I came out as gay in 2012, that responsibility changed. And a few years ago, I was sitting across the table from Paula Stone Williams, who some of you may be familiar with. She's a national transgender advocate and does a lot of writing and speaking and blogging. And I sat across the table from her and just shared my story and told her I was thinking of going public, and I didn't quite know what that looked like, but wanted some kind of advice from her. And if you know Paula, she can be quite an intense woman. And so she sat there and kind of interrogated me for a bit and asked these deep questions that were probing around. And I knew she was getting at something, but I couldn't quite figure out what it was. And finally, she kind of had the information that she was looking for collected. And she just looked me dead in the eye and said, Amber, embedded in your identity is a responsibility to be a voice for change. And I heard from God that day through Paula, because that hit my heart so deep, and it just resonated inside of me and repeated itself in my spirit for days and weeks and months. And so that was really the start of the birthing of what is now Refocusing My Family. I started kind of navigating this world of trying to write this story, and I really did it with two primary audiences in mind. I did it for the LGBTQ person who is struggling to come out of faith communities, because there are so many of them. This is not just my story. Your dad doesn't have to work at Focus for you to have this story of coming out in a conservative faith community with a parent in ministry, or as an elder or a deacon or some kind of missionary. It's so common and so prevalent, and so many people are just dying for a beacon of hope and dying for somebody that they can relate to. And the suicide statistics are just astronomical. According to the Trevor Project, they say that the LGBTQ youth is already 4 times more likely to attempt suicide than their straight peer. But if their family rejects them, they are 8.4 times more likely to attempt suicide, not from the straight peer, but from the peer who has not been rejected by their family. So you take that LGBTQ person who's been rejected by their family and compare them to a straight peer, they're 32 times more likely to attempt suicide. And the majority of that comes from religious reasons. So that is a huge passion of mine, is to help reduce those suicide statistics, because I was so close to being one of them. And so I am so passionate about reaching those people and giving them a beacon of hope. And then the second group that I really tried to target was the family and the friends and the loved ones of these LGBT people, to try and humanize this issue and bring it from kind of this hot political topic or debate that we often see in the news down to a real person with a real life and a real story and a real family. Because I think if we can humanize the issue and get people to be drawn in and to relate to the story, that's how we can create these conversations for change, to be able to do better for these families and for these young people. So I really wrote it primarily with those two groups in mind. And I walked a very fine line as I navigated this journey, because my publishers really kind of wanted me just to like nail Focus to the wall, throw the parents under the bus, nail them to the wall, and you've got like big sales, right? But I said, I can't do that. If I do, one, nobody's going to listen to me. And two, I'm going to repel the people who need to read this book the most. So I was very careful in how I wrote it. I'm very honest. I don't mince words or back away from how I was treated or how this harmful theology has impacted my family, or how that's been devastating to my family and to my life. But I also try to be very respectful and compassionate, because in many ways, my parents are victims of bad theology themselves. And they're doing what they truly believe God has asked of them to do. And so I tried to be very careful in walking this line as I wrote the book. And the book, it was quite the journey to go on, to try and dissect your entire life, especially for somebody that really was not familiar with identifying emotions. Emotions were not very well accepted in our home. Emotions of happy or excited or blessed were the acceptable emotions, right? You all know that one, yes. But things like sadness or disappointment or anger were certainly not expressed in our home. So I learned from a very young age to just compartmentalize what I felt, and to hide my deeper emotions, and to wear this kind of facade that everything was okay all the time. And I always knew that I was different, but I didn't know how or why or what that was, because I had nothing to compare it to. I had no exposure to LGBT people or to just diversity in general. And so I really was masked in a lot of ways. I grew up in the heart of the purity culture that says true love waits, and the whole I kissed dating goodbye with Joshua Harris. Oh, you know about that too? What? That was like a whole movement. That was so not just me. Yeah. And I'm sorry. Because unfortunately, I think it's done a lot of damage, not just to the LGBTQ community, but to a lot of relationships in general for a variety of reasons. But I did that with all of my 13-year-old heart. I turned 13, and on that day, all of my family and friends came from miles around and drove across states to come visit me and celebrate this kind of coming of age into womanhood. That was like this big ceremony. And I signed on the dotted line of this purity pledge that said I would save sex for marriage, and did it with all of my 13-year-old heart. I thought it was what I was supposed to do. I thought it was what God asked of me, and what you did to be a good Christian. And I wanted to be a good Christian, and I wanted to be a good role model. And it wasn't just to be a role model. Like I genuinely wanted to please God with my life. I had always had a very close relationship with God. So I really wanted to do the right thing. And that day, my dad placed this purity ring on my finger that was a key, a heart, and a cross that symbolized that God held the key to my heart until I someday gave that purity ring in exchange for my wedding ring to my husband. And so I did that, just expecting that my future would look like, would be, I would do all the right things, and if I just followed God and did His will for my life, someday that knight in shining armor was going to come on his white horse down to rescue me. I was sure of it, and so I never even questioned. I think being a part of the purity culture in such a strong way really masked my ability to identify my sexual orientation earlier on, because one, I never dated at all. That belief that someday that knight in shining armor was going to come, I just waited for that. So I never felt the need to date, and didn't realize that it was also because there was no attraction to men whatsoever. And then I was primarily in female circles, which also did not play out in my parents' favor in the long run, because all my friends were girls, which they thought was great until it wasn't so much. So that was my world. That was what I saw for my future, and that was what I expected it to be until I got into my early 20s and was like, something's not adding up. Like, I've done all the right things and I've tried to please God with my life, and yet I still have never dated. And I started realizing, like, is there something wrong with me? And asking these questions of what have I missed and where have I gone wrong? And then I fell in love with my female roommate, which was not what was supposed to happen at all. And that was the biggest wake up call to me, because it was so out of left field, because it was not even something that was in my radar at all. I knew very little of the LGBT community. And what I did know was all the negative stereotypes that you hear. They are defiled, they're an abomination, they're going to hell, they've rejected God, they're heathens, all the, they're sexually loose, all the negative stereotypes. That was the little bit of information I knew, was just the negative. So when this happened to me, I didn't know what to do. I just felt like divided in half, because I loved God with all my heart, and yet this was something I could not change or deny. And I just began to wrestle and wrestle and wrestle. And so I actually want to read to you an excerpt from the book that comes from the prologue, when I'm beginning to kind of unmask this and realize my sexuality for the very first time. That realization caused me to feel disjointed, like I didn't fit in anywhere. It was as if half of me belonged in one world and half of me in another. Both worlds coexisted in my heart, yet refused to cohabitate in real life. I stood at a crossroads. I refused to lie or be a hypocrite, but I knew that if my secret were found out in church, I would no longer be allowed to serve in ministry. Torn and conflicted, I engaged in a mental war day and night. A war I couldn't escape because it raged inside of me. This internal war was so brutal it produced external scars. Self-injury was the only way I knew to survive. Eventually, I began to wonder if the struggle was worth it. I wondered if it would be better to be dead. And when that thing that you are taught to hate, we don't use that word because we love everybody, in Jesus' name. But it's underlying, right? And so when you're taught to kind of hate this thing or this group of people, and then that group of people becomes you, then you start to hate yourself. And so I turned all that emotion inward and began to deal with self-loathing and self-hatred and self-injury, which led to suicidal ideations. And I just was on this downward spiral. And I didn't know what to do. But I knew I was going to have to face this fear head on. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I had wrestled and tried to ignore it for as long as I could. And I knew I couldn't ignore it anymore, because if I did, it was going to end up being the thing that killed me. And so I didn't really know how to start this journey of reconciling, or if that was even possible. I wanted to kind of figure out what I really believed for myself, as opposed to what other people taught me about the scriptures. And I really wanted to know what the Bible said on this issue. I didn't want to just water down my theology to justify my way of life, as people told me I was doing. I really wanted to know. And I was just as terrified to find out that God was okay with me being gay as I was to find out that God was not okay with me being gay, because I knew that either way my life was going to drastically change. And so I just started on this journey, and I didn't really know how to do that or what that looked like. But first I got a good therapist, because that does wonders for anybody. And right, I mean, therapy is so taboo in the Christian world, and it should not be. And so I found a therapist who was a Christian, but not a Christian therapist. And if you know what I mean, meaning they would support my beliefs and my journey without impressing theirs on me. And they also gave me a safe place to explore emotions, really for the first time in my life. And so I had a lifetime of emotions packed inside of me that I began to just slowly unravel. And that was so liberating for me. In fact, we actually had this basket of rocks. And I talk about it in the book because it was such a monumental moment for me, where I got these rocks, and she wanted me just to write on each rock the name of a thing or a person or an event that had influenced my life. And I started doing that, and then like from there, the experiment like just evolved. And I don't know exactly what she meant for it to do, but I started like kind of organizing these rocks in a picture on the floor, like a map of my life. And so suddenly I could see myself, and I could place God where God was in reference to me. I could place my family where they were in reference to me. I could place shame and guilt and trauma and all these different pieces of my life, like a map on the floor. And it gave me the ability to identify emotions for the first time and to be able to see them and how they influenced my life. And that was so helpful for me, for somebody that just had never learned how to identify emotions at all. And I really used that as a pivotal tool. Like as we went forward in our therapy sessions, if I resolved something, we'd throw it away. And if something new came up, we'd add new rocks. And I still have my basket of rocks today because it was just so therapeutic for me in being able to kind of identify and figure out these pieces of my life. So therapy was huge. And then I started dating because I was like, well, if you can't find it in counseling, maybe you'll find it in dating since you've never done that at all. And so I dated and got to know some people and tried to see like how that affected me, which was also very eye-opening. And I go into that more deeply in the book, but that was something I had never done, and it really was interesting as I tried to navigate what that looked like for me, kind of the revelations that I had. But I also really needed to be able to figure out theologically what I believed on this issue for myself. And so part of that was kind of silencing all the voices around me and trying to dig into what I really believed, and research for myself what I believed the Bible said on these issues. And there wasn't as many good resources available then as there are now. We've got a handful of fantastic resources now that do a really good job of dissecting what the Bible says on LGBT issues that I wish I would have had. But at the time, I just did the best that I could to kind of navigate and work through it and resolve that kind of head piece that would be able to help me accept myself. But I also needed this heart piece for me that helped me be able to see that it was possible for me to live as a happy, healthy LGBT person of faith. And I didn't even know if that was possible because I had never met anyone like that before. But I sat down one day kind of as a pure sign of desperation and just typed into my computer gay affirming churches in Colorado. And this church in Denver popped up. And I was kind of at my wit's end. I didn't know what else to do. So I just poured out my heart in this email to a pastor and sent it off into cyberspace. And I never expected to like actually get a response or like have him actually read it. I grew up in a 14,000 person mega church where you send something off, you never hear anything. And if you do, it's been like sent to a secretary and sent there. And then you get some scripted response of how they're supposed to respond to these issues because it's super uncomfortable for them. So I just never thought I'd hear anything. But not 2 hours went by before I got the most heartfelt, warm response from the pastor himself. And he said, please come. I will set you up with somebody to meet you, to take you to lunch, to show you around. And just please come and see what we're all about. And so I did. And I was so nervous and scared because I didn't know what I was going to see or find when I got there. I had never met an LGBTQ Christian before. And I didn't know what that was going to look like. And so I walked in the door that day, kind of timid and shy and afraid. And I found a bunch of people that looked just like me. Like, there was no rainbow flags in the hall. There was nobody making out in the foyer. There were no drag queens. Like, it was just normal people that looked and acted just like me. And I felt so warm and welcome and loved that day and embraced. I felt seen for the first time. I felt safe for the first time in so many years. And that was a pivotal day for me to be able to see that it was possible. And I began to meet these different couples and to interact with them and to see that I would hear them talk about their same-sex partner or spouse and God in the same context with no conflict in between. And it'd been people that had been together for 10, 20, 30 years. And I just remember thinking, that's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. And it was so freeing for me to see that it was possible. And so that was a monumental day to be able to kind of shift in my heart and know that it was possible for me to live a healthy, happy, free life. And once I had kind of all those pieces settle inside of my heart, I knew I was going to have to come out to my family. There was no going around it. Like some people live on one coast and their family lives on the other coast, and you only see each other for like Thanksgiving or Christmas if you can kind of get by and never have to really talk about it. That would never work in my family. Isaac knows. We're all up in each other's business. We all lived within like a mile of each other. We saw each other every day. We talked on the phone every day. We were just always so close. So I knew that I was going to have to tell them. And it was also exhausting to have to live a lie. It's exhausting to have to live in a way that makes other people comfortable when you're constantly wrestling and dying inside. And so I had my family over to my house one day, and I sat them down and I told them what the journey I had been on. And I told them what the journey I had been on with God, because I knew that was going to be very important to them, was to know how this was impacting my relationship with God. But I don't think they heard a word that I said. They glazed over with this deer in the headlights look, and I think they knew what was coming. But I continued to just kind of tell them about my process, and finally I got the words out there, and they just hung in the air. It was by far the most vulnerable I've ever felt in my life. And my dad just looked at me and said, "I have nothing to say to you right now." And he got up and walked out the door. And it was about 3 weeks before we spoke again, which was like a lifetime to my family. And I had hoped that they would have had some time to kind of process and do a little research and kind of come to an understanding of my perspective and where I was coming from. But it ended up being much worse. And they said, "We feel like you've died." And they compared me to murderers and to pedophiles and to bestiality, and said, "How dare you do this to the family? This is so selfish, to do what makes you happy and not think about how this would impact the family. You're putting your dad's job on the line. You're breaking the family apart. I don't know what the holidays are going to look like for us." And of course, that was all I had thought about for months. Like they have no idea how long I thought about that leading up to the day of coming out. But it was just a brutal conversation that just got worse and worse and worse. And so the second excerpt that I'm going to read you comes from the end of that conversation as it's beginning to wrap up. Finally, after I'd been thoroughly reprimanded and ostracized, the conversation wrapped up. But as I went to leave, there was one final jab to my heart that made all of this very real. As I went to walk out the door, my dad asked for the key to their house back. The childhood home that I'd grown up in from the age of 7, the door that had always been open to me to come by whenever I needed, was now locked, and I was left out in the cold. I was now an outsider, no longer welcome as part of the family. He said they no longer trusted me to have open access to their home. Baffled, I removed the key from my keychain and handed it to him. I think he tried to soften the blow by saying, "I love you," before closing the door, but I don't remember for sure. All I could feel was the hurt, the pain, and the rejection from those I cared about the most. I never expected my parents to be accepting or approve of the fact that I was gay. But for the first time in my adult life, I took the risk of completely trusting in their love for me as parents. It was met with rejection. In my hour of greatest need, my family abandoned me. Arriving home, I opened my journal, and in utter heartbreak wrote 10 of the most painful words of my life. My worst fear has come true. I've become an orphan. And that was one of the darkest days. Going forward, it didn't get better. It just continued to get worse over time. Sometimes they used hurtful words. Sometimes it came through passive-aggressive behavior. But they just slowly pushed me further and further aside and ostracized me from the family till I knew I no longer belonged. And so really, as a method of pure survival, I ended up picking up and moving to Denver because I didn't know what else to do. I felt trapped in Colorado Springs. I had lived there all my life. People knew me. They knew my family. I always felt like I was kind of looking over my shoulder, walking on eggshells. Never felt safe. And so I did. I just picked up and moved to Denver and got plugged into Highlands, into the community there more deeply. And they really are the ones that supported me through that. I truly believe that moving to Denver was one of the best decisions I could have ever made. The people of Highlands Church have absolutely saved my life and been there when I needed people the most. It was amazing to have people in your corner that you really didn't even know very well, and yet they were family for you when no one else was. And I really am so grateful for their support during that time, because it wasn't just my parents that turned their back on me. It was all my extended family. I lost the majority of my friends, the church that I had gone to for 14 years, and the only hometown I had ever known. So I really was starting with nothing again. And building that community, it also, it was an interesting dynamic because I was losing so much, and yet I felt such a deep peace and joy in the midst of that. And so I absolutely believe that being a part of a healthy community is a big part of what saved my life in those darkest days. That and this little monkey down here. This is Half Pint. And she has been more support than I ever could have dreamed when I first got her. I got her actually after my first girlfriend and I broke up, and significantly underestimated the impact that an animal can have in your world and on your life. And during my darkest days, she was there when nobody else was. And when you just need like a heartbeat on the other side of the door at home, it didn't matter if I was gone 10 hours or 10 minutes. She's always equally excited to see me when I come through the door. And on days that were extremely hard and dark and difficult, sometimes I couldn't even make it up the stairs before I was in tears, and she was just there. And it wasn't, the support and just the love of truly unconditional love that comes from an animal. I think we can learn so much about God from our animals, because it's truly unconditional. And I had no idea, because I had never really bonded with an animal before, the impact they could have. And not only that, but just the simple structure of having a routine every day, somebody that depended on you for simple things like food and water, and a reason to get outside, and those kind of things just gave me some consistency that kind of grounded me in those really dark times. And so the year that I came out, I had a series of significant and horrible events, because it wasn't just coming out and moving to Denver, but my dad also had a serious heart incident where he almost died. He had to have open heart surgery, and then it failed, and he had to have another open heart surgery a week later. And so I was there during that time, but it was super awkward because I wasn't really accepted in the family, but I knew I needed to be there, and felt very much second class, and it was very stressful. And then he got out of the hospital just before my only sibling got married, and then my grandfather unexpectedly passed away, all within 12 months of each other. So I was hanging on by a thread. And I went to my doctor and talked about making Half Pint a service dog for PTSD, because I had had that for the majority of my adult life for reasons that don't necessarily have to do with my sexual orientation. And I touch on some of that in the book as well. But she could see my long history in the files, and she's like, oh, absolutely, I think this is a great idea for you. And so we began training her, which wasn't hard because she was always very in tune with my triggers and responses. But the biggest thing was getting her comfortable in public places, because she wasn't used to that, and she'd get very overstimulated. But clearly she no longer is. She travels like a champ, and she just is happy and content as long as mom is near. But it's been an amazing piece of my journey that was very unexpected. I was single when I came out, and then about a year after that is when I met Clara, my wife. She's in the back here today. Been very grateful to have her tour with me for almost every event that we've done. She's been a huge rock and support. And we actually met at Highlands Church, so you can meet somebody at church. It does happen. Happened for us, even though we're gay. It's amazing. What? So it really, it was an interesting time, because here I'm like simultaneously losing everything. And yet, as Clara and I dated and got engaged and got married, it just was like this interesting dynamic as I'm grieving things from this past world and past life, and yet at the same time feeling so much hope, feeling so at peace, feeling so free, feeling so at home in my own skin. It was a really interesting dynamic, and things with my parents waned over time, and then as I think they just continued to hope, that there was still hope for me to change. And in fact, I've heard some rumors that I think they still, in some degree, hope for that. But once I got married, so there was kind of some hope when I was single, that I could still change. And then as we got engaged, got married, that hope kind of continued to dwindle. And then when we got married, I had no family at my wedding whatsoever. And it was the people of Highlands Church that stood in where my family should have been. But just a few months after our wedding, my family cut ties with me completely. And we haven't spoken since. So that's been about 4 years that I've had no contact with my family. And as hard as that has been, and as much as there's still like pieces of me that I continue to have to grieve and work through, I still would never change it for anything in the world. I always felt like I lived in some kind of Barbie doll world where everybody was fake and wore a mask and nobody was real with one another. And I always longed for more. And the people I have met since coming out have been those people I've longed to meet all my life. They're so deep, they're so rich, they bring so much to my life because of their own journeys that they've walked and been on. And the people that we've built as chosen family, I mean, nothing replaces your family, but we've had people that have become great support and like chosen family to us. And even though we still have to kind of navigate things like holidays that continue to be hard, I wouldn't trade the life I have now for anything. I am so happy. I am so free. I just feel so alive in a way that I never did before. And I'm so thankful for that. So that has prompted me to write my story, to share my story, to give other people that sense of that there can be more, to give them that sense of hope and belief that it will get better for them and that they don't have to choose between these two pieces of themselves that feel so opposite, that they can come together in a beautiful way that will make them very happy and whole. We're going to do a few things where I want to talk a little bit more about the nonprofit that I've started, and we'll do that in a bit. We're going to open it up from some Q&A shortly here. But I'd like to take just a moment to just breathe, because I know this is heavy. I know it can be a lot. I know it can be triggering for a lot of people. So if you want to just close your eyes, and if that's comfortable for you, and just take a deep breath. I know this stuff is just hard for a lot of people in a lot of ways. And so I'd like to read to you one of my favorite quotes by Marianne Williamson. And as I do that, just feel free to continue to breathe deep, to continue to have your eyes closed if that's comfortable, and just take in these words. Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us. We ask ourselves, who am I to be brilliant, gorgeous, talented, fabulous? Actually, who are you not to be? You are a child of God. Your playing small does not serve the world. There's nothing enlightened about shrinking back so that other people won't feel insecure around you. We are all meant to shine, as children do. We were born to make manifest the glory of God that is within us. It's not just in some of us, it's in everyone. And as we let our own light shine, we unconsciously give other people permission to do the same. As we are liberated from our own fear, our presence automatically liberates others.
And we're going to have a moment for Q&A right now. So if you have a question, maybe raise your hand, and we have a mic for you to be able to speak into so we can all hear the question. Any questions for Amber?
Amber, you and I were friends growing up, oddly enough. And then when I came out, I saw her online and I was like, wait, what are you doing here? We've had a very weird reconnection. We were both at New Life Church in Colorado Springs during the Ted Haggard fall. I was an intern at that church during that, and how long had you been going to that church?
I had been there about 14 years 12 to 14 years when that took place.
And
it's a long time.
I mean, you weren't out then. I wasn't out then.
No.
Was your first thought, that can't be, or
Oh yeah,
or
absolutely.
did you? I spent the whole evening, the whole night. We had a night-long prayer meeting about it, where we prayed for the gentleman in Denver that he would find Jesus and repent.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting. I personally never had any any problem with the man in Denver, because I felt like he was only exposing what was needing to be exposed. And I certainly have very different views on the whole situation now than I did when I was closeted, because I had no idea of my sexual orientation at all until a couple years after that happened. And so it really, my first thought was, this can't be, because this was the man that, Ted Haggard, that we had looked up to for so many years as a kind of the shining light of evangelical Christianity. And he had climbed the ladder so high that no man could touch him. Almost.
All right. I asked the first question. Who's up next?
And turning back around. No, I definitely have very different views on it now, but yeah, it was very difficult at the time because of this. I had been there for 12 to 14 years. I mean, that was my whole life, and suddenly it felt like it was just crumbling before me. And now I see it as more of I think hypocrisy, more than anything, because he was preaching one thing from the pulpit and advocating for the marriage between a man and a woman. There was a legislation going on that time, and that was the very time that he was exposed. So I think I see it more as hypocrisy than anything now, than at the time where that it being a gay escort had this additional weight to it that was devastating. That wouldn't affect me the same way now, I think.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I just wanted to thank you so much for sharing your story. It's my sister came out a number of years ago, and my family's from Colorado Springs as well. Wow. And my mom works at Compassion International. Okay, yeah. So, I know what you're saying. It's just, the parallels are just striking. Just from the family's reaction to just the whole hoping that someday she'll turn back. and right, it's just, right. And then the whole thing about passive aggressiveness. My mom is famous for just leaving these little articles on Facebook, not saying anything about them, just leaving them there. Yeah, I'll just leave this here. Yep. So thanks so much for sharing. That really spoke to me, just to see that experience is typical of that crowd.
Oh, it's so common, and which is unfortunate that it's so common. But I think my parents continue to hope that I will change. Because I had a situation where I ended up reconnecting with the parents of one of my childhood friends, and she said that she had talked to my mom earlier this year, and that my mom did know about the book, and she asked her if she was going to read it, and she said, I don't know. But she said my mom was excited that my friend's parents were in my life, but with the caveat that them being in my life was still going to help me change. And she said, I think your parents are going to be very hurt when they find out that we become allies instead. Because they read my book and said that doing so completely changed their mind on LGBTQ issues in the church. So that was a really cool personal story for me that felt like, okay, this isn't just impacting strangers, this is impacting people that I knew and grew up with, which was really special to me.
That actually kind of leads into my question and your thoughts on the level at which somebody who's part of the queer community continue, a healthy level of continuing to engage with those who are dear and like my best friend is an evangelical pastor, and I just got engaged, and we're having this weird everything's gotten super awkward, and I know I can figure it out on my own, but thoughts on the healthy levels at which we keep those connections, but also set those boundaries that say I'm not gonna buy the love the sinner, hate the sin line anymore.
Right. And I think some of that comes with what you're comfortable with and what those boundaries are for you, because some people feel like they're strong enough to engage in those conversations ongoing, and some people just can't. I often can't, and I think that that's okay. There are people that have the strength, and sometimes they're LGBT themselves, or sometimes they're allies who go in on our behalf. And I'm so thankful for those people that are doing that kind of work, because some of us have been so damaged, and hurt by the church that it's hard to stay in those kind of connections. I think a lot of it comes with setting those healthy boundaries, and to what degree you feel safe in doing that. People will say, they'll ask me, well, do you ever still feel guilt or shame over your relationship now that you're out and you're married and I'm like, no, I really don't. But I'm also very careful how much I interact in those kind of spaces. So I'm very careful with, setting healthy boundaries to where the majority of my time is spent with healthy, affirming spaces where I feel loved and accepted and like I belong. And I am careful how much time I spend in those. And you've got to kind of be ready for it. You kind of have to have your guard on and be ready to engage in those conversations in a way that's open and loving if they're willing to have that, but also setting healthy boundaries for yourself. And I think when it becomes detrimental to you physically or psychologically or spiritually, emotionally, that's when you've got to set some boundaries and maintain that, because you're worth it. And you don't have to engage in a place that's going to be emotionally or psychologically damaging for you.
Hi, thank you for being here. I read your book and it was awesome. It was great. I go to a church that I would consider affirming. I know personally that they support people in the congregation that are LGBTQ, but they don't talk about it from the pulpit. And I know with other social issues, that can be really important and powerful to have the pastor speak to it. I'm on the fence because I, like you, choose my battles very carefully, and I really see Jesus in that church, and that's where I feel at home. But I don't know if I should raise my expectations and expect them to be more on the front lines. They just kind of don't talk about it.
Can I ask if you're part of the LGBT community or if you're an ally?
I am not. I'm an ally,
okay.
And my granddaughter is part of the community.
Okay.
So I'm very close to the issue.
Yeah,
but,
yeah.
Compared to most other churches, they're doing fantastic. But is it enough? That's my question, right. And I don't know the answer for myself either.
Yeah, and that's a hard question, I think, because there are people that feel called to go in and kind of help reform this theology from the outside. And I think a lot of that work is being done by allies. I'm so grateful for people like Adam Phillips and the people that are doing this work on our behalf and speaking up. I think there's so much change that needs to happen, and I think we need more affirming spaces for these people to feel safe and belong. And a lot of that is modeled by what is said from the pulpit. People know they're safe by what is said. Our church reads an ethos at the beginning of every service that makes sure everybody knows that they're safe here. And that makes a huge difference to the people that walk through our doors that may not know what we're about. I don't think it means that you have to have a rainbow flag out front but I think it means that you model in your leadership what that looks like, that you have diversity in your leadership so people can see, oh, I do belong here. I can lead here. I am equal here, rather than being only able to attend and still feel subhuman because you can't really belong in all parts of leadership like other people. And so I think the more that people are willing to raise those issues and bring it to the forefront, and the more people that are willing to speak about it, the more safe places we'll have for these LGBT people to come and feel safe and not be so isolated. And I think it has an impact in how, and not only the isolation factor, but isolation has an impact in suicide. And so them feeling less isolated and supported by community can absolutely save lives, I believe. So I think it's really important personally.
Thank you so much for coming to Portland and sharing your story. I went to Liberty University, actually, and that's enough. I am not part of the community, but I've become an ally since leaving that school. And one of the things that you mentioned that I really appreciated is these are people that are affected by bad theology too. And I care about my friends back there a lot, and I want them to feel free to love everyone because I think they're conflicted about this, but they don't allow themselves to think outside of the box.
Absolutely.
And it's so tied to politics, and especially there. I'm just curious what you believe needs to happen in the Church of America to, like, if it's even possible to, like, for there to be a redemption or something.
I do want to believe that it's possible. I think that we are making strides. It's just slow. We are slowly seeing churches come out as affirming, but a lot of them are paying a very high price and losing half their congregation or the majority of their financial support or their ordination, or so it's a lot. They're coming at a high price a lot of times, and so I'm so grateful for the people that have the courage to do that, regardless of the cost, even when they have no skin in the game. That is just amazing to me, and I'm so grateful for the people that do that. And so I think there's still a lot of work to be done, and I think the work that you can do as an ally is very critical and important, because it really makes a difference. People may not listen to my voice because I'm within the community, but they might listen to your voice. And so that, I think, if you can kind of pull those people, with your influence, you may reach people that I could never reach with my story, because it's different, and so I think the degree to which you can speak up and just even let people know that you're an ally, and be brave enough to announce that, and to give people a safe place to come and share their struggles with you is huge as well, because that will help more people. There's probably people around you that you don't even realize that are looking for a safe place to go. So I think a lot of work is coming through allies as well.
If you were talking about your family, if maybe if you don't see your parents necessarily ever like having a change of heart, can you see like your sibling? Do you think that their place in this story could maybe be any different? I was just curious about that.
I don't know. My brother, I've got one younger brother. He's about 3.5 years younger than I am. And I really don't know if there's hope for that or not. I actually came out to him the night before I came out to my parents. And we had a fairly decent conversation. He said, I don't understand, and I know I'll have some questions, but it's certainly not something I would disown you over. And then he came again the next day when I told my family, or my parents, and I don't know what happened when they walked out the door those days, but I never heard from him again. And we had, some times when we were trying to kind of navigate things as a family, and we had some hard conversations, a couple years later. And then just, I don't know, 2 or 3 years ago, he called me out of the blue. Hadn't heard from him in a year or two. And he called me, and he had just had his first baby girl. I didn't even know they were pregnant. And he said that he just wanted a relationship with his sister, and he'd like to meet Clara. And so I thought, okay, maybe he's trying. And I sent him a baby gift, and the holidays came, and I sent him a Christmas gift. Never heard from him again, and still never have. So I think he feels caught in the middle. He's very close with my dad, and I don't think he wants to jeopardize that or what the consequences would be for standing up. So I really don't know. I've got one cousin that's been pretty supportive through it, but the majority of all of our family has been very conservative Christian as well, and so it's they've all taken a pretty hard stance. I have had a couple friends that have my story has impacted them, and we've been able to kind of reconcile, which has been really special. But as far as the family front, I haven't seen any of that happen yet.
Do we have time for one more
Got
question?
one more. Yep. One more. Last one. Wait, what's right here? 3 people raised their hand all of a sudden.
What was your relationship with God throughout all of this? As you were being disowned and abandoned by your friends and family, did you feel rejected by God as well? Or what was that like?
So I never completely turned my back on God. I still was able to kind of maintain this relationship with God throughout. And I really accredit that a lot to my years at New Life, actually, because in those teen years, I had nowhere to go and process my emotions. There was just no safe place for them. And so I literally sat in the back of the church with my Bible and my journal and my worship music for hours and hours. And I mean, hundreds of hours. I got stacks of journals from just sitting in the back of the church by myself, processing my emotions. And I think that those years really set a foundation for me that carried me through these really dark times. And I think it gave me the ability to separate what I knew of God personally from what people were doing to me in the name of God. And that helped a lot. There's still stuff that I am wrestling through, and I think, you take it in layers. So I am kind of uncovering different layers of some of the spiritual trauma that I've encountered. But I've certainly seen my theology change quite a bit. I've had to go through kind of a deconstructing of that theology and reconstructing and continue to do that, and probably forever will. And I think that that's okay. That means I'm always learning, I'm always growing, I'm always discovering something new. And I've come to find a lot of contentment in that. It used to scare me, of like, oh, I don't have all the answers. I don't have it all in my pretty little box. And now what am I going to do? Because there's a crack in my foundation. And if I'm wrong about this, what else am I wrong about? And everything's going to crumble. And, and that was so scary to me. But our church is really good at fostering wonder and awe and questions and doubt. And that's given me a safe place to kind of explore a lot of that and not feel so threatened like I have to have all the answers. And I realized that, I lived in this world of certainty all the time where everything was so black and white. But if you have certainty, what do you need faith for? If you have all the answers, where's a need for true faith? And I think the place that I live now requires a lot more true, authentic faith than where I lived the majority of my life. So I've come to be okay with living the questions and being in the midst of not having all the answers and being okay with that. So, all right. I think with that, I'm going to give just a brief overview of the work that I'm doing now, so you kind of guys know where we're headed, and then we're going to pass it off here. So with Refocusing My Family, we've been touring for quite some time, but in the midst of writing this book, I've also founded a nonprofit organization called Beyond that is specifically designed to help these LGBTQ people through their coming out process, with a focus on those that come from conservative faith communities, because there's really nothing like that out there for them yet. There's some great organizations doing work with reforming theology or helping parents of LGBT kids or bringing community together, but there's nothing that's helping them navigate this process. And there's a huge need for that. I mean, the influx of emails that I have had through telling my story shows there's just a huge need for people to have just support in navigating what this road looks like and how to do it well, especially when you come from a conservative faith community or you have somebody in ministry in your family, and how does that impact you? And so we're working to provide them the support, the coaching that they need, and the resources to be able to navigate that successfully. I led a workshop recently at the Gay Christian Network, which is now Q Christian Fellowship Conference, and they gave us the largest workshop room available. And it was packed. So like a third of the 1,000 people were in this room. There was like 350 people in there. And they were all there to learn about how to come out to their non-affirming families. And we opened it up for question and answer, and like half the room shot their hand in the air. And it was like this overwhelming like gasp, because it was like, what do we do? There's so many people that are so desperate for this. And so there's such a need for this kind of work. I had a girl just a couple weeks ago that emailed me from Colorado Springs, a 17-year-old girl, and said, I tried to commit suicide because I didn't think you could be gay and Christian. And I found your book in the psych ward. It saved my life. Yeah. So I'm so humbled by that, and I'm so honored by that it's reaching these people I hope it would reach. And we're going to continue to do this kind of work because it's very needed. And so So we're gonna, Adam's gonna talk about doing a bit of a love offering tonight. The work that we do has been, people think, oh, you've written this book and now you're rich and famous and everything's great. No. Starving and poor and tired is more like it. Fulfilled and happy, but very tired and poor. this book tour isn't something that the publicists have done. This is something we've done out of our own pocket because we believe in the message. We believe it needs to be heard, and we believe in helping people. And so anybody that's interested in helping continue this kind of work and by partnering with us through Beyond, we would be so grateful to work more and partner with you and being able to move this message forward because it's so very needed. There's so many people that are just desperate for this hope. And so there's slips on your seats where you can give either cash or check tonight. There's also, we're able to take a card in the back as well. One-time donations on reoccurring gifts. You can also give online. We can help you set that up. But anything is so appreciated as we move forward in making this. We've got projects that we would like to do, but we just need the support and the resources beneath us to help make it happen so that we can help people like this 17-year-old girl. I mean, I get emails like this every day of people that are just starving for hope. And so there's so much that we want to do and just need the support of you and the resources on the ground to be able to take this further. So I'm going to hand it over to Adam at this point.
Thank you so much, Anne. Thank you so much, Amber. Thank you. We do want to encourage you to give. There'll be a basket going around, and if you have a card that you would like to use, there's a square reader in the back. We keep these events free so that we can gather as many people together to hear stories of transformation, but also be part of the solution to a lot of these challenges, these opportunities in our world. Again, we're really proud of the work that Amber is doing with Beyond, and we want to send her home with some great support. And she's also selling books in the back afterwards, and we'll sign them. And Half Pint is signing books too, which is pretty remarkable. We're joined. This event is co-sponsored by the Union for Affirming Christians, and Fred Davey, who is Executive Vice President at Union Seminary in New York City, is with us tonight. He's become a dear friend and a helpful guide and mentor in this work. It takes us to lift up our voices to inspire change, to advocate, to add our voice. God has given us these beautiful voices, and we can be instruments of peace and justice in the world. And so Fred is visiting tonight with his partner Michael, who is part of SAGE, which does advocacy and services for LGBT elders. But Fred, would you like to come up and maybe say a word for a moment?
Thank you, Adam. And thank you, Amber, for your story and your witness, your work. And just being a beacon, a guide and a light for all of us, but particularly for people who find themselves in some very dark and troubled times. So thank you. And I have a feeling that this is just the beginning for you. And I think we're so extraordinarily fortunate that is indeed the case. So glad you're here. I am Fred Davey, and I am the Executive Vice President at Union Seminary in New York. I'm also a Presbyterian minister and have been for about 35 years. I'm an old man. Some of you know Union. It has been around a long time, since the 1830s. It's always been a pretty progressive seminary without even trying to, most of the time. 1850s, we were kicked out of the Presbyterian Church simply because we believed that you should be able to use the tools of science to understand Scripture. And at that time, the Presbyterian Church didn't think so, so they booted Union as a heretic institution. We train people to be now not only clergy, but folks who also want to be involved in societal and community change. We are a graduate school of theology in that we provide master's degrees and PhDs for people who want to study faith and religion. We are now not only non-denominational, but we're interreligious in that we believe that the heart of God and the radical love of Jesus is wide enough to include people of different faiths. So we now have a Buddhist track, an Islam track, in social justice, as well as a relationship with the Jewish Theological Seminary across the street, where people who truly want to do interreligious work. Not only that, not only do we do the academic work, but we also like to do what we call public-facing work, because we believe in the presence of God in the world. And we believe that we should manifest that and make that a reality as we train people to do the academics. So we have a number of different programs that focus on really pressing social and other issues of our time, where we believe faith has a word to say. So that's from the environment to criminal justice reform to economic justice. So we have Corinna Gore, who's the daughter of Vice President Al Gore, who's also a graduate of Union, who runs a center there called the Center for Earth Ethics. The Reverend William Barber, who Adam was with in Selma just recently, and who runs the Poor People's Campaign, is there at Union as a visiting professor and helps us in our efforts to really talk about poor people and the need for economic justice in America. And we also have Michelle Alexander, who wrote the book, The New Jim Crow, and does a lot on criminal justice reform, who's there. And so, needless to say, we want to do a lot on LGBTQ issues. One of the things that happened when we got to Union, when I got to Union 8 years ago, was that we began to ask the question, how is it that we can think about and engage those people who are traditionally conservative and evangelical around LGBTQ issues, believing that within every movement there is a heretical group. You know, there are those people who really take seriously the radical love of Jesus, and it's just hard to read the Gospels. It's hard to think about, and I'm not going to preach a sermon. But it's hard to think about Jesus' encounter with the Samaritan woman at the well. That story in itself should stop every Christian dead in his or her tracks. She was a woman. She was a Samaritan. She was talking to a man who was a rabbi. And he accepted her. And she was divorced. Not only are you not married, but you've been married 5 times, and the man with whom you're now living is not. So she was divorced and living in sin, and she was Samaritan, and she was talking to a rabbi who was Jewish. And it's just like crazy. It's like, how can you not stop dead? There's the heresy of modern day Christianity and conservative Christianity right there. How can you not stop dead in your tracks with that story and have it arrest you and then just wrestle with what it means? Anyway, so we said within these traditions, there have to be people who are thinking differently. And if those folks are there, which clearly they are, what is Union's role in engaging them? How can we do it? How can we be value added? And so, after many conversations, we decided that with money from the Arcus Foundation, which is a private family foundation that's headquartered in New York City, that's funded by a very wealthy man by the name of John Stryker, in a place that I worked for a period of my life, we decided that we would see if we could bring together a group of people who come from traditionally conservative or evangelical faiths, traditions, who wanted to give voice and expression to a different way of being believers, but particularly in the public square. So how do we go to the places where people make decisions that have an impact on the lives of LGBTQ folks and say, "Thus saith the Lord," in a new way? And with the support of Arcus, we began to reach out and we heard about Adam and the amazing work that he is doing, the sacrifices that he and his family made on behalf of people like me. We met Isaac and others, and then suddenly there was just this wellspring of people from around the country who were suddenly a part of this group that we recently have come to organize as the Union of Affirming Christians. I guess in the end, we want to be a loving but radical, inclusive force in the world that has an impact on public policy as it relates to LGBTQ folks. And that's what we're going to try to do. And I think with the leadership of people like Adam and Isaac and the leadership of all of you in this room, we are the folks we've been looking for. If we don't do it, nobody else will. So I think with all of us together, as people who are believers, as people of conscience, as people who just believe this place should be a little bit better, we should leave it a little bit better than we found it, we can make a difference. And I'm honored and humbled to be here. I thank you for letting me don those doors and be a part of this gathering. Amber, I thank you again for all the work that you're doing and will continue to do, and I hope there are opportunities for us to partner with you. So, thank you.
In wrapping up here, we just want to talk a little bit about ways we can still be involved and use our voice. When I got the call from Fred to come to Union Seminary, it was very easy for me to say yes, because Union Seminary was the place of one of my heroes in the faith, Dietrich Bonhoeffer. And maybe you've read The Cost of Discipleship, like Together. Good Christians get into good trouble, as John Lewis says, who I was with in Selma. He wrote a book called Letters and Papers from Prison, Getting in Good Trouble. He was part of the resistance in Germany to resist things that were happening in his own time that were very disturbing to folks that were on the margins of society. And so for me, Bonhoeffer's been a great inspiration in reimagining what it looks like for me as a Christian witness, as a leader, as just a neighbor, how to love my neighbor as I seek to love myself. And so one of those things is to raise our voices. And we see a number of very concerning things in our country these days. Different, but very concerning nonetheless. We, of course, have heard about the trans military band, but just yesterday, a brave soul named Logan Downs registered to join the U.S. Air Force. That story was in national media yesterday. And the military said, yes, you can come. So it takes just some bold, courageous people to resist and say that they're going to do differently. But we still see a number of things that concern us around LGBTQ rights when it comes to healthcare. It's documented clear as day that our LGBTQ friends, especially our trans friends, experience immense discrimination when it comes to healthcare. And so there are some concerning things happening in the Department of Health and Human Services. And so we want to promote positive healthcare solutions for all of our neighbors, including our LGBTQ friends. So I posted on our Facebook page, and we'll send out a story about that was recently in Politico, how you might get smarter on that and how you might be able to raise your voice on that. We also have these RFRAs. Anybody heard of a RFRA? That sounds like a terrible disease. RFRA means Religious Freedom Restoration Acts. And one of the pioneers of these pieces of policy was actually a governor named Mike Pence, who is now Vice President of the United States. Religious freedom to some people is oppression done by religious people in another way. So in Indiana, then Governor Mike Pence issued a series of RFRA laws that singled out and discriminated against Indianans. The church stood up. The Christian Church, Disciples of Christ in particular, stood up. Some people in the church stood up and said, this is not religious freedom, this is religious oppression. And they resisted that. We saw this happen too with Governor Jan Brewer in Arizona in recent years. The business community and people of faith and conscience, as Fred mentioned, came together. Now, not all Christians are out to get us. There are some good Christians in the world. There's some good Muslim and Jewish and Buddhist neighbors in the world that are banding together. And so that's what we're trying to do at Union for Affirming Christians. We are trying to bring people together, come up with solutions to these problems in the world, these challenges that we face. Just today, we hear rumors that another Supreme Court Justice, Justice Kennedy, may retire sooner than expected. And again, this is not about partisanship, this is about the common good. But when Justice Kennedy retires, that will open up a seat that could threaten things like marriage equality that we so fought for in recent years. So it's time for us to come together, to click on that email, to pick up your phone, dial your state senator, the governor, your elected officials in D.C., even burn up the White House switchboard if we have to say that we are people of faith, we are looking to do the right thing for our neighbors, and that means LGBTQ justice, equality, inclusion. So look for an email on that. There will be a way for you to get involved. And we will have a couple more Bridgetown Forum events later this year. We are looking at the criminal justice reform work that we hear about with Michelle Alexander. She's not the guest, but we're looking at doing an event around that. And we're looking at doing an event around climate justice. We also at Christ Church are very proud to be involved in Portland's Pride Parade every year, and we've got a really lovely stunt that you are going to enjoy. So if you'd like to participate in some fun, I'll introduce you to my friend John, who's here tonight as well. We are at Salt and Light Lutheran Church. My friend Melissa Reed is the pastor here. This is a safe, inclusive congregation. They do amazing work. If you're looking for a church, I encourage you to check out Salt and Light. Also, we are at Christ Church. We meet downtown at historic First Christian Church. If you need somebody to talk to, if you need somebody to cry with, if you need somebody to just rage about what has happened in your life, we are here for that. You can talk to me, you can talk to Isaac, Elsa's here, Marcy. We have a lot of folks here that will be your friend in this journey ahead. So again, make sure you buy Amber's book, and talk to you soon. Thank you so much for being here.